Continuamos. Durante el pasado Congreso, los Museos en la Educación, celebrado en el 2012, tuvimos la oportunidad de conversar de una forma un poco corta con Rika Burnham. A partir de ese momento hemos estado interesados en conocer y compartir con ella las nociones que han sustentado su labor como educadora en museos con planteamientos diversos a los nuestros, como tienen los museos norteamericanos. Rika Burnham es jefa de educación de la Frick Collection en Nueva York. Anteriormente fue educadora de museos en el Metropolitan Museum of Art desde 1985 hasta el 2008. Fue reconocida por la Asociación Nacional de Educación Artística por sus logros continuados en la enseñanza. Esto fue en el 2001, nombrada académica del Getty Museum en 2002 y recibió el premio James Burke, me corrige si no lo pronuncio bien, por sus logros en las artes en 2003, siendo la primera educadora en museos que recibe este premio. Ganó el premio Charles Robertson Memorial en la School Art Language en 2005 y en 2006 fue fideicomiso académico en el programa de Royal Collection Studies en Londres. Ha sido ponente invitada y ha desarrollado talleres en multitud de museos de arte en Estados Unidos desde 1989. Ha sido educadora invitada en el Summer Institute of Contemporary Art y directora de proyectos del Art and Art Education en la Escuela de Formación del Profesorado en la Universidad de Columbia. Sus publicaciones incluyen varios ensayos sobre educación en museos y es coautora del libro La enseñanza en el museo, la interpretación como experiencia, junto a Elliot Keiki, publicación editada en la primavera del 2011. Bienvenida, Rika.
Thank you. Thank you. Gracias a todos. It's a very great honor to be in this museum, a thriving, beautiful, and marvelous museum with an equally thriving and marvelous education department. An honor to be with so many assembled colleagues, creating now a new international community for us in museum education. And today, of course, brings special joy to my heart as it focuses on teaching. I add my thanks again, as previous speakers have done, to Guillermo Solano, thank you, Ana Moreno, thank you, the Equipo Departamento de Educación, thank you, and to the Equipo Thyssen, EducaThyssen, thank you. I also wanted to add long distance thanks to Mexico, to Jessica de la Garza, who's at the Museo Nacional de San Carlos, who was responsible for translating our book in English into Spanish. And it was this book that brought us together. And I wanted to present this copy, Anna, to your department for your library. So thank you very much. I also want to thank Rufino Ferraras for giving us two important thoughts with which to begin our day. One was his commemoration of Elliot Eisner. And on a personal note, when I began my work as a museum educator some 30 years ago, he had written a book called The Uncertain Profession. And I would say that the arc of the presentations that we've had today proves that we still are an uncertain profession. But as one of our speakers said, that we should start to see that as an opportunity and a gift and not as something negligent in our self-definition. The other idea that Rufino brought up that is something that worries me all the time is the idea of becoming a dogmatist. Because for 30 years, I have been working toward a teaching philosophy. And I say philosophy deliberately as opposed to a methodology or a dogma, but I fear sometimes that it is becoming too compressed. So I question it every day. And what I present to you today is where I am now. I may be somewhere else in another year or somewhere further away in another year or two. But I think that's part of our practice, is to constantly question and to change and to think more deeply about what we do. And my coda to that is that because I've been working so carefully to craft the words, my presentation will be a little more formal than the ones that you've heard preceding this one, but it will also be a little bit more unexpected as well. So as I believe everyone in this room knows, whether it is these two extraordinary Renaissance portraits in the collection of this museum, or this ultimately mysterious abstract work also in this museum, art takes viewers to the edge of eye and mind, asking us to push the very boundaries of what we see and what we understand. How to look and think about works of art with our students and visitors is the educator's challenge. And we do it every day, for we are charged with a great responsibility to bring people together with works of art in ways that are meaningful and profound. Through collective acts of interpretation, we seek the transformative rather than the prescriptive and the formulaic. We seek the intense encounter with a single object rather than a casual glance at 100 artworks. And finally, we seek experience and ecstasy rather than the descriptive and the mundane. How, as educators, to do that is the subject of this talk. I propose that the task before us is to first define our teaching objectives, and second, to think about how we look and think together in ways that honor both students and artwork. It was long thought in museums that visitors had to be brought to a single understanding of a work of art. And Ena Ritz mentioned this before in very strong words. She called them fixed ideas, and she called it a hegemonic voice. I think we have all experienced that. Art historical and curatorial study defined what that central understanding was, and there was widespread belief in the institutional voice that had to be communicated to the public. This single interpretation, what I call from on high, was solidified through publications, curatorial authority, exhibitions, docent training, to make sure that everyone who communicated with the public got the facts right. This model still exists on many of our museum audio guides and on many of our museum websites. But to our credit, sometime in the mid-20th century, it was museum educators who began to acknowledge that our visitors have a great deal to say about works of art, and that what they have to say is really interesting. It sometimes agrees with curatorial thought and sometimes does not. It's supported by a postmodernist belief that our 21st century world is better understood as a universe of multiple voices. As educators, we have moved to a place where we freely invite and accept the inquisitive and experiential participation of our visitors in the galleries of our museums when looking at a work of art. So we ask, how does this happen, or how does this not happen? And I think we all agree, why is it so difficult to do in actual practice? In a moment, I will share with you stories of interpretation that emerge when we teach and learn side by side. But first, a word about goals and pedagogies. In my early days of teaching at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, we set for ourselves two goals for our school visits. One was that we wanted our students to have fun, and the other goal was that we wanted our students to come back. It took a long time, in fact, far too long a time, I think, for our education team to realize that those were pretty low goals to aspire to in a great museum, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It's fine if they had fun. And it was wonderful if they wanted to come back. But shouldn't we be looking for something deeper, something more profoundly connective to the work of art? And why should we defer until tomorrow what should be happening today? And so we started to watch our visitors. We started to watch them when we saw them entranced, transported, absorbed by works of art. And we thought, isn't this what we want to happen? Isn't this really the goal of our gallery teaching, our work as educators, that we should bring people and works of art together in ways where they experience a state of profound revelation, even transformation with a work of art? And so for our model, we came across John Dewey, John Dewey, the great American philosopher who wrote Art as Experience, and that phrase was used earlier today, Art as Experience. He wrote it in 1934. And he said, what we're after is something in English called an experience. And he said, think of your students and the continuum of everyday experience. Before they come to your museum, they get up, they have some breakfast, they get dressed, somebody kisses them goodbye, puts them on the bus or on the subway, they get to school, the school takes attendance, they get back on the bus, they go to the museum, maybe they eat lunch on the way home on the bus, and then they go back to school, and then they go home and they start their homework. Dewey would have said that's the continuum of everyday experience. But if they looked at a single work of art and found themselves transported, absorbed by that single work of art, and they found themselves thinking about that work of art for days afterwards, even years afterwards, then they have had an experience. And then we, as the educators, have transformed them. And so we began then to redefine our goals and asking in that spirit our groups who visit our museums to become interpretive communities around works of art, to seek an experience, understanding, and this is important, that in the end both collective interpretation, that of the group, and individual acts of interpretation occur simultaneously, and they may or may not be the same. To this end, I embrace a pedagogy that places freedom at the core, a pedagogy that encourages visitors to interpret works of art through a seemingly simple idea. They will bring what they know. I will bring what I know. Columbia professor of aesthetics, Maxine Green, advises all of us, all you need to know to look at a work of art is your lived life. The great Brazilian philosopher of education and advocate for social justice, Paulo Freire, was extremely clear. He said, the teacher is no longer the one who teaches, but the one who is himself taught in dialogue with the students, who in turn, while being taught, also teach. I'm going to repeat Paulo Freire. The teacher is no longer the one who teaches, but one who is himself taught in dialogue with the students, who in turn, while being taught, also teach. An experience can result in an active interpretation, both through words and through states of wordlessness. Interpretation through words and interpretation without words. I will devote the next 15 minutes or so to sharing stories from interpretation that takes place through words. That is, a dialogical practice. After that, I would like to cross with you a frontier to a place where we make possible experience without words. So, if our goal is experience and the result is interpretation, what does it look like? How do we get there? What's the role of information? As we seek meaning, we are pulled into an artwork with our thoughts, observations, questions, ruminations in any order. That is the beginning of the freedom to look and see and make sense and transform. Although this is just a slide, and we are all here because we believe in real things, take a moment to look at this beautiful and enigmatic self-portrait by Rembrandt. Allow yourself to have your own thoughts. Look at him deeply, and let's give ourselves a few moments of silence. Now you should have received a piece of paper, folded in half, and a postcard within it. If you could take the postcard and a pencil or a pen, and on the back of the postcard, I would like you, I'm going to give you 1 minute. So in a stream of consciousness, write all the thoughts that come to mind as you look at this. Are you ready? Yes. Okay, ready? Go. Yeah, take the postcard out. Take it out and write on the back of the postcard. Good. Thank you. Sorry. You have 15 more seconds. Okay, and stop. And now I'm going to say 1, 2, 3, go again, and I would like you to whisper your words to Rembrandt. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, now try it again. Same murmuring whisper quality, but read it from the bottom up. Ready? Go. Okay, thank you. So I've allowed you just the beginning, allowed you into just the beginning of this picture with your own thoughts, the space where you claim it as your own. But now I'm going to ask you to imagine that you are sitting in with this group of high school students at the Frick Collection, and this is what they have to say. A student begins the conversation by noting how Rembrandt wraps himself in darkness. But the darkness is not flat, nor is it the dark of night, he says. It is more of a philosophical darkness. Perhaps he is wondering how much light I have left. He is ponderous, heavy, forceful, says another. Another student pipes up. She says, I'm always taking pictures of myself with my iPhone. And why? Because I want to know what I look like. I'm sure that's what Rembrandt is doing. He's painting himself here and in so many other times of his life because he wants to know what I look like. The other students start jumping into the conversation. Look at the flickering shadow over the eyes, they note. The place that you want to see is both most hidden and most revealed. He has such interesting hands, big and massive, that seem to push aside the frame. What a robe. I love the rich colors that come from such a limited palette. Another student says, I keep looking at his lips, so tightly pursed. It's as if he's about to speak or has just said something important and urgent. He's growing larger and more kingly the longer I look at him. Look at the scepter he holds. He's the king of painting. Another says, well, at first I thought we were looking at him, and now I find he's looking at us. Note at the same time he's looking beyond us. And there's a smudge of red on his cheek. A student wonders if it's a patch of paint reminding us he's a painter, or if it's a skin condition. She decides it's a dab of paint. Another says, so if it's a dab of paint, is he really painting what he looks like? Or is he painting about painting? Or could he possibly be painting how he feels rather than he looks? As an educator, I shared another self-portrait on an iPad, the famous Kenwood self-portrait, in which Rembrandt is in real time only 7 years older than he is in the Frick self-portrait, and in which he pours light onto his face. Again, as the educator, I quietly added how Rembrandt concerned himself with the interweaving of divine and human form when your life is interrogated by both heaven and earth, by light and dark. A student concludes, but how triumphant Rembrandt is, even in his old age. Look at this other Rembrandt painting that hangs in the Frick. We can see Rembrandt in his youth, known here as the Polish writer. There he is carrying the light on his back into the darkness from his youth to his old age. So now I would like to ask you to please stand up. And to find 2 or 3 or 4 people around you and to continue to talk about this painting. And I give you now 3 minutes for that.
the microphone.
It's not working? Is it bouncing or what?
Yes, the direction is...
Oh, okay.
If you want...
And so,
okay.
yeah?
No. We need...
Can this move? Is that better? Could they hear me? They couldn't hear me, do you think?
do you want one? No.
No. Could they hear the first part of the talk?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, everyone. So, what just happened in this marvelous roar that filled this room? We joined the high school students, as it were, and extended the interpretive community to include ourselves in order to make possible our own experiences. Each response that each and every one of you just made is a gift that further opens the work of art. Through our collective endeavor, we work toward an experience. So to step back into pedagogical mode, what were the conditions for this? 1, silence as well as talking. 2, privileging a single work of art for a sustained period of time. Understanding that ideas are not controlled. Do I need this? Is this better?
Wait.
Okay. Wait. Okay, is this better? Okay, and if I start to get too gestural and it moves away, start waving at me, please, right? So I'm going to go back. The conditions, silence as well as talking, privileging a single work of art for a sustained period of time, understanding that the ideas are not controlled by whoever the educator is, but that the ideas are allowed to move in, to emerge in random order. That every idea is truly welcomed, that's number 4, that we truly believe in the value of what our visitors have to say. And finally, 5, that the educator stops asking questions, but follows the observations and the inquiries of the students. In this way, I believe we most powerfully create the conditions for experience and transact our acts of interpretation in a spirit of freedom. Everyone is invited to participate, and satisfying interpretations emerge. A pedagogy that is based in freedom sits cozily with democracy, social justice, a participatory new world. We come away, rich or poor, young or old, novice or expert, owning the painting through our own creation of meaning. This was done before, but I think it's worth repeating if we played the same scenario out with an authoritative from on high voice. So take a look at the slide and imagine you're in the galleries, and I'm the docent. Rembrandt painted this great self-portrait in 1658 when he was living and working in Amsterdam. He was 52 years old, and though he had experienced great financial difficulties, his reputation was widespread throughout Europe. Exploring the dynamics between light and shadow, Rembrandt was a master not only of painting but of printmaking and drawing, and ran a considerably large and prestigious workshop. And so on, and so on, and so on, until the painting dies on the wall before you. In museums, we might generously call it a lecture, time-honored and straightforward, an approach that can be transfixing if extremely well done. But Dewey would say, even a well-done lecture, the barrage of information precluded experience. And Paulo Freire would say, the lecture marginalizes our students. We have oppressed them, forsaken them. He would go on to dismiss the lecture as a banking system, where you open the heads of the students and put a deposit of information in the head of each listener. He said this was a dead practice in which we teach the students to be passive receivers, not only in the museum, but in life itself. It was, in Paulo Freire's thinking, an act of violence if you insist your students surrender to your telling. To my mind, equally oppressive, and I will say this is very controversial in the States, my opinion on this, but to my mind, equally oppressive is the tyranny of asking questions. Some museum educators, in order to avoid the lecture mode, have resorted to the use of questions, hundreds of questions. Looking at works of art with so many questions can seem like a test or an inquisition, or simply confusing. As my niece Emma said after a school trip to a large museum in the United States that used a system of questions, she called me on the telephone and she said, Aunt Rika, why did they ask us so many questions? Don't the people who work there know anything? So to return to dialogue and experience transacted in words, it's a balance. They will bring what they know, and the educator will bring what he or she knows. Context and information is used judiciously to follow a thought or to propel thinking, but not to predetermine it. Questions from participants should be answered with thoughtfulness and respect. We want to create a balance where students, educator, and artwork play together. But in practice, with real works of art, teaching the galleries with a truly open mind, it is sometimes not so easy. We doubt, we ask ourselves, is this what we should be doing? What about those powerful curatorial institutional interpretations? Can things mean anything? Can things go wrong? What if unpleasant, politically incorrect, frightening ideas emerge, interpretations we fear instead of embrace? I will share with you some examples that tested my own commitment to freedom and openness. In this painting, we will experience the paradoxical value of frustration and uncertainty. This painting by Giovanni Bellini of St. Francis is a painting that has been called the single greatest Italian Renaissance painting in the United States. Studied, loved, a so-called destination picture at the Frick. Brightly lit by its own picture light, art historians have tried to decode every detail, saying this means that or this means this, but none of these symbolical readings have made for a satisfactory reading. Some scholars have proposed Francis is singing to the sun, or receiving the stigmata, that is, the wounds of Christ, or that we see him stepping into the morning light. Curators have said it's actually just about the landscape. The one thing that everyone agrees upon is that it's not the usual narrative that we see in a stigmatization of Francis, as we see in this beautiful one in the collection of the museum, where the clues to the story of the stigmatization are there. A divine being flying in the sky on a cross, Francis receiving the rays of gold that penetrate his hands, Brother Leo, who has been told not to listen to Francis talking to God, is small, hiding on the left in a little white robe. These are the symbols of the story of a stigmatization. But none of that occurs in the Frick St. Francis. I turn off the offending picture lights, and Frances slips from morning light into moonlight. The rocks become luminous. The everyday world huddles in the background. Frances sees something we don't see. He gasps. Suddenly, we think we see a man who sees his God. Instead of Brother Leo, it is we, the viewer, who witness a man who stands in holiness, who accepts his sanctity. A donkey standing in its own space becomes curiously important. In the gallery, a discussion with students went on for nearly an hour, without any real conclusions. The students were so anxious. How could something so old, so studied, still be so mysterious? The next day, a student sent me an email, and she said, "It felt as if we kept getting closer to the center, only to be drawn back out again. And once we finally got to the center, there was no flashing sign, no treasure map, not even a hint." A few days later, she sent me a second email. "Although that experience was frustrating at times," she wrote, "I learned to relish it. After we had spent so much time trying to decipher or shed some light on the meaning, it seemed as if this slightly lost, questing feeling was exactly what the informed viewer was meant to take away." This student learned that for her, it is the mystery that makes the painting so great. She went on to say, "I love this painting. It's so beautiful. I wish I could stay here until the next group comes. I know it would come out differently." And the student was right, for in true dialogical engagement, the stories always turn out differently. And that, of course, is the goal for the educator, to be open to new thoughts, new experiences. Maxine Green reminds us this is the central mystery of teaching, to make possible experience without predetermining what that experience will be. Sometimes you come to a place of poetry, as this student did when she said this slightly lost, questing feeling. It was, for her, a momentary truth, rich and satisfying. More difficult is the challenge and value of accepting contradictory interpretations. This is a watercolor by Anselm Kiefer in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum of Art called "Everyone Stands Under His Own Dome of Heaven" from 1970. A tiny figure in a green military coat salutes under a transparent hemisphere set in a vast field dusted with what appears to be snow. When asked about the meaning of this image, Kiefer said, "The pose here has nothing to do with fascism. It was supposed to be like a lightning rod. Each man has his own dome, his own perception, his own theories. There is no one God for all." But what of the high school student who's 16 years old who says, "The figure looks so friendly, a cute little doll waving hello," while the senior citizen next to him identifies it instantly as a Nazi officer in a Nazi salute? Can an image hold two such disparate readings? Should it? Can or should the educator allow it? And so where does that dilemma fall in the landscape of pedagogical freedom? From previous study, I know the American critics saw these images as pitiful or repentant, or a recognition that the Nazis had been diminished to doll-like, impotent little men. And so while Americans avidly collected works by Kiefer and saw them as celebrating Germany's defeat in World War II, German critics saw the tiny figures as incubating, and in the larger context of Kiefer's imagery, that everything was still there. All the Nazi imagery was still there, like Siegfried's sword, waiting quietly for Germany to rise again. So fearful were these images, such as this one of Kiefer's, that Kiefer was shunned by German art collectors and criticized for being sympathetic to the restoration and resurgence of Nazi imagery. And eventually Kiefer was hounded out of Germany. My position as the educator, is that the image is sufficiently and probably deliberately capacious enough to hold two such disparate readings, and that both need to be shared. Literary theorists tell us the text reads you as much as you read the text. Our work as educators is to expand the interpretations, not to control them. And so we must be willing to leave a discussion in contradiction. I share with you now a work of art in which the interpretations of the students and other scholars contradicted that of the curators. The problem of contradictory interpretations becomes more acute and exaggerated when we leave the realm of Western art, and the potential for cultural misunderstanding increases. The problem of divergent interpretations is extreme in this story because it turned out that the curatorial idea was just one of many. This series of photographs is by the contemporary Chinese artist Hai Bo. The highly respected curator of Chinese painting at the Metropolitan Museum of Art proposed they were a continuation of the Chinese tradition of travelers in a landscape and hung them in a Ming and Qing dynasty landscape painting show to suggest the continuity of past and present. In gallery discussions, however, some students interpreted them differently as figures moving from an uncertain past to an unknown future with great fortitude. Others thought they were leaving behind an agrarian past and moving into an unknown and perhaps unpleasant urban future. Still others thought they were a political statement about old-fashioned clothing and bicycles in contemporary Chinese life. Another wondered whether they should be read left to right in Western style, thus ending with the figure on the far right, looking into the light, a very Western concept, or should they be read right to left in Eastern style, ending with the enduring forward momentum of the worker. One day we were joined by a museum educator from Shanghai who vehemently questioned the curator, telling us that no travelers in the Ming and Qing were ever workers. The idea is heretical, he said, only scholars traveled. As the gallery teacher, I let all the ideas sit and then shared the words of the artist. However old you are, it is always nice to return to your past. I like to think of this painting as a metaphor for our teaching. It is a painting by Goya known as The Forge that hangs in the Frick collection. A quick look and we think this is a tight group of workers making metals of some kind. A second look and we realize that the head of the man on the left is about to be struck by the hammer of the man on the right. We then hesitantly at first and then more persistently wonder, are they actually making something? Are they getting anywhere? But as we look, there is more and more urgency in their work. We realize the action, like our work as educators, is carefully calibrated. One swings down, the other moves away, like clockwork. There is coordination, energy, life, intricacy, concentration, as well as boldness and courage. The longer you look, the less real and the more mystical the project becomes. Humankind working together. Whatever the work is, whether it's Goya's painting or a museum program, it is not one that takes place in a totally logical world. We pull tightly together in the galleries to forge meaning, educators and students working together, side by side in acts of interpretation. And so, within the play of dialogue, a work of art reveals itself. We discover then a realm beyond the everyday, a world where we borrow the eyes and the thoughts of everyone. So here I want to end with the interpretation through words and cross the frontier into a space of wordless interpretation. A space where we create events that take us in through the back, the behind, the dark side of the artwork, where the artwork whispers and cajoles, insists, and then disappears, where the artwork in some way we can't truly explain attaches itself somewhere inside us. So now I would like you to take your white piece of paper and your pencil. You can take your postcard and put it under your seat. And take your white piece of paper, the little piece of paper that's inside the folder, and gently tear it off the folder. So that everybody should have something like this. Okay. Hold on to it. Put it in your pocket. If you have a pocket, or if you don't have a pocket, slip it down your sweater. And then I would like you to open your folder like this and take your pen or your pencil. And you'll see before you a slide that is in the collection of the Thyssen. And I would like you to choose one of Jackson Pollock's strands, whether it's white or the kind of silvery blue that you see, or the dark black brown. Choose one of those 3 strands. And I'm going to ask you to draw continuously your strand as I change the slide. So once you start, your pencil does not leave the paper, but continuously moves to replicate the strand of paint with which you've begun. Okay, is everybody ready? You're going to have about 1.5 minutes for this, so you'll be drawing very swiftly. Okay, ready? Go. Keep going. Just pick up where you left off. Stay with your color, with your thread. Keep drawing as much as you can of it as you see it. Keep going. Keep going faster until you fill your whole sheet of paper. And you have about 30 more seconds. Okay, and bring your drawing to a close. And could all the people who drew the white come forward? Actually, I should ask you to raise your hand. Did anybody draw the white? Okay, could all the people who drew white come forward? Okay, and make sure you have your white piece of paper accessible. Come here.
Right?
Okay, and I would like you to walk around in this space as the color white until you've come to the end of your drawing, and then stop and take out your little white piece of paper and do something with it. All without words. Ready? Go. Using your drawing as a map, start walking around in this space until you have completed your drawing. Everyone. And keep walking until you come to the end of your drawing. And now, could everyone who drew the color black come down and join them and do the same? Until you come to the end of your drawing. Then stop. Whenever you come to the end of your drawing, stop. Keep moving until you come to the end of your drawing. And now could all the silver and blue people come down and join, following their drawing in the same space. So everyone who wants to, who has a drawing, should come down now. And when you've come to the end of your drawing, stop. But keep going until you come to the end of it. Okay. And then take your drawing, your map, and hold it high above your head. And let it fall. Your drawing, let it fall. Just drop it. And now take your little piece of white paper. Can I have this one? Can you speak for me? And so, can you take it in both hands very gently and turn around and look at the Jackson Pollock painting and very slowly move it in front of the painting. And then with one hand, as slowly as possible, with one hand, crumple it. And then just toss it in the air. Thank you. So don't lose your drawings. Thank you. Don't lose your drawings. I'm going to end right there. Is that good? I have a few moments. So thank you everyone. I bring my comments to a very brief close. And thank you for everyone who participated in the wordless interpretation of this beautiful painting. And I want to end with a thought that works of art live because we interpret them. They invite our contemplation. We enable, as educators, focused looking and sustained engagement to make possible deep and affective experience, whether it's in words or without words. The key qualities are time, absorption, reverie, imagination, knowledge, all of which should be on the increase. These are the conditions in which the objects ultimately disclose themselves. This makes possible transformation, experience, and finally, acts of interpretation. Thank you so much for today. Gracias a todos.